If controls are strong, control risk higher or lower than if they were weak. The risk is lower, right? Remember, risk is a bad thing. Always remember that. So on your test, some of you guys are going to write down a risk later on in class, and I'm going to be like, that's actually a good thing. That's not a bad thing. Right. So the risk is lower. So is detection, remember these are kind of relative to each other, so we say higher and lower. Is detection risk higher or lower? It's inverse, right? So detection risk is higher. This is the one that kind of takes a minute to think about. You're thinking to yourself, why would the auditor want to increase their detection risk, right? It's not that they're increasing it per se, it's more like the standards allow the auditor, after testing internal controls, to rely on the testing of those controls, right? So I don't need to go digging through every single thing. If I've tested their controls, they're effective, I can just do other testing, right? So if detection risk is higher, what does that mean for the net? What does it mean for the N? Not extent, but for the N. So not as effective. I'm trying to get away from using the word less because it can get confusing with extent, okay? Not as effective procedures, or not as robust, is a word that sometimes is very, that's the N. What about the E? That was the extent. Mia? Less testing, right? Testing, smaller sample. And with the timing, the PCAOB standards, right, the auditing standards allow for the auditor to do some of the testing in interim when control risk is lower, right? So they can go in mid-year, towards the end of the year, a couple weeks before, and do some of the testing because the risk isn't that, well, we'll get to that part. So some testing in interim. We're talking about a lower risk situation. Okay. Those of you who are more analytical, remember that the equation has to balance. Those of you who kind of like to logically think through things, think of it this way, right? If I tested the controls, right, that they keep secure passwords every day, at Walmart, the supervisor in charge counts all the drawers, then the cashier counts their drawer. At the end of the day, they count it again, they check the receipts, they match it before the supervisor recounts it, right? They have that procedure, I've tested it, it's working effectively, right? As an auditor, I can then rely on the resulting reporting from those controls, right? I don't have to go back and re-add up every receipt and make sure every day was matched because I can trust the controls that have compiled that information into the computer. So technically, I'm doing less testing, right? Because I can rely on the controls that supported the financial reporting. Remember I said if you're having trouble, flip through some of these things to kind of help, right? So we keep inherent risk here, right? We're going to keep it constant. So we're using the outside corners, right? This is saying that, well, keeping that constant, if control risk is lower, then the detection risk can be higher. Versus if control risk is higher, then the detection risk has to be lower.